Karl Marx, His Life and Environment by Isaiah Berlin, book review. So this book is a bit of a classic, if biographies can be considered classics. It was first published in 1939. I believe it's still in print, although I got my copy from the used book section on Amazon.com, but it's famous enough that you should be able to track it down easily regardless, either through Amazon or interlibrary loan or something like that. So Karl Marx, everybody knows Karl Marx, but Isaiah Berlin, the author of this biography, is quite famous as well. He's sometimes referred to as the most famous political philosopher of the 20th century. I have to admit this is the only thing by him I've read, or at least the only full book by him I've read. And I don't really have a handle on what exactly his political philosophy is. I did try to research this. I went to Wikipedia and stuff like that, but I think he is one of those kind of old school political philosophers that doesn't kind of fit neatly into labels. So you can't just sum him up by saying like, he's a socialist or he's anti-communist or something like that. He seems a lot more nuanced than that. Wikipedia calls him a liberal, but I'm not sure that would apply to today's political scheme. I mean, he was based in England, I believe, originally from like Eastern Europe or something like that. And he was born in 1909, so I think more of like an old school liberal. His biography on Marx seems sympathetic to Marx as a person, although sometimes a little bit critical of some of Marx's philosophy, but gently critical. The hint that he may be kind of more conservative, at least to me, was his account of the Paris Commune near the end of the book seems surprisingly hostile. I'll get to that in a bit. So yeah, if anyone kind of knows more about where Isaiah Berlin falls on the political spectrum or what his views are, just let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I guess just go to his Wikipedia page. Anyways, I tracked this book down because of my interest in Karl Marx. Now, I should put my biases out front. I was a history major at school, not a philosophy major. So I tend to be interested in these biographies of kind of great figures like Karl Marx because I'm interested more in the narrative of their life. And I realize it's hard to separate Marx from his philosophy. But, you know, I'm kind of interested in, you know, like what went on in Marx's life? What made him tick? What were the kind of big adventures throughout his life? It's almost impossible to find a biography like that because, you know, Marx famously spent most of his life just kind of researching in the British Library and publishing philosophical tracts. So you really have to get into the philosophy. There are, of course, some narratives in Marx's life. You know, 1848 revolutions. In his early life, in his young life, he was expelled from several countries, so he had to keep moving. There were the political squabbles he got into. He got into a lot of squabbles with other 19th century revolutionaries. He was also involved in the first Working Man's International, some of the meetings and political squabbles behind that. And of course his infamous infighting with the anarchist leader Mikhail Bakunin and their kind of fight over the control of the First International. And that's all in here in brief. But Isaiah Berlin is also quite interested in Marx's philosophy. So you've got complete long chapters devoted to the philosophy of the young Hegelians, or another whole chapter devoted to historical materialism. I struggled through these chapters. Philosophy is not my strong point, gives me a bit of a headache. But well, yeah, what are you going to do? Huh? You can't read a biography of a 19th century philosopher without talking about the philosophy. The book, to its credit, is pretty short. It's under 300 pages. And in addition to the philosophy, Isaiah Berlin does a good job of summarizing Marx's life in under 300 pages. Sorry. So, things I found interesting about this book. Isaiah Berlin does a very good job of kind of picking out the apparent paradoxes in Marx's life or in Marx's philosophy. For example, Marx lived during the age of romantic revolutionaries, right? This was 1848, Paris Commune, the barricades, the revolutionaries on the barricades and all the street fighting and stuff like that. And during this period, there were a number of romantic revolutionaries with cult followings. I'm going to mispronounce some of these names, but people like Herzen, Mazzini, Blanqui, Lassalle, who had almost religious-like followings and fit the image of the romantic revolutionary perfectly. Marx, by contrast, spent most of his life in obscurity, just going to the London Library every day. And yet, nowadays, who do we remember in association with the revolutions of the 19th century? Aside from history geeks like myself, the names of those other people are kind of completely forgotten. Again, historians know who they are, but the man on the street does not. And Marx is kind of the one name people associate now with the revolutions of the 19th century. Ironic. But the irony goes further, according to Isaiah Berlin, because Marx's central thesis was that historical material conditions and not ideas are what influence history. So according to Isaiah Berlin, the very fact that we remember Marx nowadays and have forgotten all these other people undercuts Marx's central thesis. And here's another irony that Isaiah Berlin picks up on. Now, this is after Marx's life, but it has to do with Marx's philosophy. Marx believed that communists should organize from the bottom up. You should build a massive grassroots support among the working class. This was a strategy that was followed by the German and Austrian communists. And what happened? They got crushed by the fascists. Whereas the Bolsheviks did something completely un-Marxist in that they did a revolutionary coup d'etat. They had very little grassroots support, but they were able to just kind of seize control of the government in a coup. And what was the only successful Marxist revolution? The Bolsheviks. Again, keeping in mind that this book was written in 1939. I know that the Chinese Revolution would have been 10 years later. Now, a lot of this book also focuses on Marx's conflict with Mikhail Bakunin. Mikhail Bakunin is often referred to as the founder of anarchism as a political philosophy. Depending on, I don't know, some people say Joseph Proudhon. Am I pronouncing that right? Either Joseph Proudhon or Mikhail Bakunin. Mikhail Bakunin seems to be more famous. And Mikhail Bakunin was also Marx's big rival for control of the Working Man's International. I was, in my younger days, when I was a young college student, very fascinated by Mikhail Bakunin and very sympathetic to him. I have since, Mikhail Bakunin is one of those figures who the less you know about him, the better. If you just kind of know about him as a symbol for a kind of anti-authoritarian socialism, then he's very appealing. The more you find out about Bakunin as a person, the less appealing he is. And the more I've been reading about him, the less appealing he is. For example, He positioned himself as Marx's rival for the control of the International. He did not have 1/10 of the brilliance of Marx's analytical writing. You can see this very clearly if you can compare the essays the two of them wrote. He was a romantic revolutionary, but he didn't have a very clear ideology, and he did not really care about revolutionary uprisings that went off half-cocked. Or by saying he did not really care, he was in favor of it. Marx was horrified by the idea. Marx was horrified by the idea of having a revolution before you're ready. Having an uprising before you're ready, because then you're just going to get crushed by the forces of the state, and it's going to be a tremendous loss of life and loss of organizing and all this kind of stuff, which indicated that Marx was a better pragmatist, and also maybe that Marx kind of had more of a sense of the value of human life, and you don't just throw it away on these half-cocked revolutions. Bakunin did not have any such scruples. And Bakunin was a huge anti-Semite, which, after the 20th century, that's not a good thing. I mean, it wasn't a good thing back then, but, and Bakunin used these anti-Semitic attacks against Marx, who was, of course, a Jew. Isaiah Berlin comes off very sympathetic to Marx and very against Bakunin, and yet Bakunin's criticism of Marx was right. Bakunin was accurately able to predict what would happen if Marx's people got into power. And to his credit, Isaiah Berlin features an extended quotation by Bakunin. I'm going to read from this quotation. This is Bakunin as quoted in Isaiah Berlin's biography of Marx. We believe power corrupts those who wield it as much as those who are forced to obey it. Under its influence, some become greedy and ambitious tyrants, exploiting society in their own interests or in that of their class, while others are turned into abject slaves. Intellectuals, positivists, doctrinaires, all those who put science before life, defend the idea of the state and its authority as being the only possible salvation of society. Quite logically, since from their false premises, that thought comes before life, that only abstract theory can form the starting point of social practice. They draw the inevitable conclusion that since such theoretical knowledge is at present possessed by very few, these few must be put in control of social life, not only to inspire, but to direct all popular movements, and that no sooner is the revolution over than a new social organization must be at once be set up. Not a free association of popular bodies working in accordance with the needs and instincts of the people, but a centralized dictatorial power concentrated in the hands of this academic minority, as if they really expressed the popular will. The difference between such revolutionary dictatorship and the modern state is only one of external trappings. In substance, both are a tyranny of the minority over the majority, in the name of the people, in the name of the stupidity of the many and the superior wisdom of the few. And so they are equally reactionary, devising to secure political and economic privilege to the ruling minority and the enslavement of the masses, to destroy the present order, only to erect their own rigid dictatorship on its ruins. Bakunin was right, huh? That's exactly what happened. Okay, moving on, talking about the Paris Commune. I mentioned this at the beginning, but Isaiah Berlin gives a very surprisingly hostile account of the Paris Commune. I've read a lot on the Paris Commune. It's a polemical subject. Conservative historians kind of condemn it. Socialist historians praise it. Berlin's account seems to only be based on the conservative historians or on the bourgeois press at the time. Isaiah Berlin also has an interesting idea here. Karl Marx initially opposed the Paris Commune before he supported it. He said, no, don't do the revolution. We're not ready. This is going to be a waste. Isaiah Berlin has the idea that Karl Marx was not only opposing it on tactical grounds, but also on philosophical grounds. The Paris Commune was more in line with Bakunin's ideology than Marx's. So Marx was opposing it for those reasons. And then, once it became clear that the Paris Commune was going to fall, that it was about to be crushed by the conservative French army, then Marx embraced it at that time for the cynical reason. He knew that this was going to go down as the most infamous revolution in Europe at the time, and he wanted to link his name to it. Now, this is an interesting claim. I've read a bit on the Paris Commune. I've read a couple other biographies on Marx. This is the first time I've heard this claim. I don't know. What's interesting is Isaiah Berlin doesn't really back this up with supporting evidence, which is not to say that there isn't supporting evidence. Again, Isaiah Berlin is one of the most famous political philosophers of the 20th century. I'm sure he knows what he's talking about, but it would be nice if he kind of supported this with more evidence so that I knew what the sources for this were. I don't know. Okay, that's all I have for this one. Let me know in the comments if you have any further suggestions. Sorry, I got a little startled by the door opening suddenly there. But yeah, fortunately I was at the end of this video anyways.